Hello, and welcome to episode 5 of Cricket Scorers Untallied. I'm joined, as always, by Sue.
Hello, Brian.
And Jules.
Hi, Sue and Brian.
Hello. If you missed any of our previous 4 episodes, then they are still available from your favourite podcast provider. I hope you're all keeping safe and well in these unusual times. With news this week about the resumption of international cricket, there is maybe a glimmer of hope for other cricket to resume, but this may be a way off yet. In any case, it would be great to see some live cricket once more. But in the meantime, there has been some archive footage on the BBC in the past couple of days.
Yeah, it's been fantastic. So BBC Two last night was showing the England-West Indies test at Lord's in 1984.
Wow.
Where Greenwich got 241 not out. But it was just, Richie Benaud was the highlight for me. Then closely followed by Greenwich's innings, which was great. But it also showed Lords back in the 80s, and obviously you can make out the pavilion still and the tavern stand.
Yeah.
But a lot of the rest of the ground is quite different, but the scoreboard was a thing of beauty. And because they didn't have the graphics in those days, they kept on panning around to the scoreboard. And so you can see the scorers, and it was all kind of manual, like you'll see sort of. Wow, currently if you sort of go to some of the grounds in India or Sri Lanka, they have like proper old school manual score boards. And it was like one of those scoreboards.
So how many scorers then would they have had? Would they have had individual scorers in each of the boards?
So they kept on showing the board that's now where the scorer's hut is over at Lord's. And in there, well, it was kind of depending on what was going on in the game. It looked like they had 2 people up top who kind of looked kind of bookish and a bit nerdy, like scorers. But underneath, it seemed to be an absolute like house party of a bunch of people sort of peering out of the little window thing that they had at the bottom, all waving and cheering when runs were being scored by Fowler. So I was trying to work out how many scorers they did have and then how many groupies they had.
Wow.
Fantastic.
We'll have to have a look back at that and see if we can identify who they were.
I didn't quite see. They had another scoreboard opposite, but I didn't really pick up on that as much. They didn't pan to that. It was quite interesting seeing some of the graphics because obviously it was quite the early stage of having computerised graphics on for scorecards, but they put all the initials out for the players, which was actually quite welcome to see rather than just a surname or S. Curran or something as they would do now. You're thinking that Curran, is that Tom? Is that Sam? What's going on? So, yeah it was really good.
I believe that other scoreboard is where the grandstand now is. The other scoreboard you refer to. Which I think is where the Scorebox used to be.
Yeah, it did apparently used to be the other side of the ground, you're right, but that's before I've ever worked there. Brian, did you work in it there when it was that side of the ground?
No, I did work when it was across the other side, which is now the Allen stand, where the restaurant now is, and the new stand there. That we used to work out of there, but no, before my time, that one. But I do understand from someone who has worked there that the communication methods between the two were basically a long stick bashing the ceiling of the scorebox underneath to the scoreboard to basically contact them to make sure they got the score right.
Can you imagine if that went wrong and your sort of stick went through like the floor or the ceiling? You'd be like, "Oops, sorry guys, I've just broken the scorebox." But at least you got the score right.
Oh, that's quite amazing to think that, it was done like that with sticks and, whoa, we wouldn't get that these days.
No,
not at all.
So I believe next week they're going to show, I think it's England West Indies at Headingley, and that is from, I think, the 90s. So Yorkshire might have got to the same level as Lords did in the 80s, but we shall see.
Oh, that'll be interesting. We'll have to have a look out there. Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely, yeah, definitely.
But no, it's just lovely to see cricket on free-to-air TV. And I think BBC have also got the highlights package for the actual forthcoming West Indies test as well, which will be really good for people to see it. That's really, really encouraging.
Yeah, it is. They said that it's going to be on BBC at 7 o'clock, I think, in the evening. So, yeah, that'd be great.
I'm kind of excited because our overseas player at Old Wimbledonian, so the first year I started to score for them he was a wicket keeper. It's a guy called Joshua De Silva. and he's actually been picked as a reserve wicketkeeper for West Indies for this tour. He had a really good season out in the West Indies, so I'm pretty sure he's Trinidad and Tobago, and he's coming over, so it's really good sort of to see the progression. So I don't want any of the, well, you don't want anyone to get hurt or anything, but obviously it'd be great to see him play cricket, so I'll be half supporting West Indies in this Test series.
That's brilliant. Sue, I understand we had a lead on the scorer and the environment they worked in the Guernsey match that we discussed on our last episode.
Yes, although we still haven't fully identified who it was, but I believe it was a man scoring, and it was just one person scoring alone to minimise the number of people that were involved, and that this person was kept separate from the players. So they were scoring all on their own in a different environment, and that the players operated the electronic scoreboard themselves. But it would be interesting to know then where that scorer was located, because it sounds as though they kept the scorer well away from everybody. If they couldn't operate the electronic scoreboard. It would be interesting to get a little bit more information. So if you're out there, whoever you are, Guernsey scorer, then do get in touch with us via our Twitter feed or our email address, and just let us know what it was like to score alone in that sort of environment.
It's interesting you talk about the conditions there, Sue, because I was doing another dice cricket match this week, and one of the people who was commentating on the team that he was rolling the dice, I guess, for, was saying about what the conditions were going to be for the forthcoming Test series, and it does look very, very restricted, even on a sort of more commentators front. It'd be interesting to see how Test Match Special, for example, would do their statistician role, whether they will have... Well, I'm not sure they'll have Andrew Sampson, for example, because he's probably based in South Africa. Whether they'll have Zaltzman sort of speeding in from somewhere, I don't know. But I think they're very, very limited on who they could have attending the match in itself and how that's going to work. So I guess all will be revealed in due course.
Yeah, it won't be long till we find out, but it is going to be interesting to see how they do it, because they're not going to, I would imagine they wouldn't allow many journalists in, and so everybody would be operating on a reduced team, or whether maybe some people could be doing it remotely. I don't know whether that would work.
It will be interesting to see, actually, because if you think about the scorers on the match day, because you'll have the Opta scorer, you'll have the book scorers, you'll have the electronic scoreboarders, you'll have whoever TMS bring with them. Sky usually have a statistician. I mean, that's pretty much a wedding party, isn't it, in terms of the numbers? So, and that's just for looking at the scorers and the statisticians, and that's not, I've probably only listed some of them, not all of them. So it'd be quite interesting to see how they do it.
And there'll be the analysts as well. I know they're not statisticians as such, but there'll be the analysts with the cameras normally. Yes. I would imagine they'd still want to be there. They'd still be part of the England party. But I would have thought that they would reduce the number of statisticians at the ground because they'll want a minimum amount of people possible.
Yeah,
I sometimes do some commentary, and that's done remotely out of, funnily enough, a first floor flat in Sydenham. But you can do things remotely if you've got the video coming through from somewhere. So whether some of the providers will start doing that, I don't know, just to ensure the social distancing. But then, even then you've got problems, because you can't really have a whole bunch of people in a house unless they're all related to each other. So it's going to be interesting. There'll probably loads of Zoom commentary teams up and down the world. And also, we're just thinking of the England setup, actually thinking about it, and what the England team would set up, let alone what the West Indies would have for their broadcast coverage, because they would have different teams doing their coverage out there. So, it's asking a lot of questions there. Be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, I'd like to be a fly on the wall and see how it all works. Yeah, it'd be really good. And you mentioned scoreboard scorers will need to be there, but my understanding that at the Ageas Bowl, that Play Cricket Scorer Pro drives the board there, and so I'm wondering if they will reduce the number of people by one of the official scorers being hooked up to the scoreboard.
Oh, that's quite possible.
I don't know. I'm just surmising. I'm just guessing at this point. I really don't know.
Do you think they'll have someone that will wheel out a really old sort of dodgy sort of manual scoreboard? So if Play Cricket Scorer, the electronic scoreboard goes down, someone can just flip over the numbers so they can see what the score is.
You'd like to think so, but I'd like to think the ICC regulations are a bit less restrictive in this environment because, as me and Sue know to our cost, wheeling out a manual scoreboard in the middle of a test match is not allowed.
You've got to say more on this. Come on.
Having I forget which test match it was.
I can remember it vividly. Being England Sri Lanka in 2014.
And me and Sue at Lords. Me and Sue were working quite happily, looking forward to lunch, and all of a sudden, all the power went to all the scoreboards. So there was no scoreboards on the ground at that point.
I think there was one because the power went out from half the ground, didn't it? Halfway round.
You're absolutely correct.
The scoreboard by the pavilion end, that one was still working, but the Compton and Edridge scoreboards were taken out.
The complication thereon was I think we were running on battery power in the Scorebox. So therefore we were rapidly losing the ability to update that one remaining scoreboard.
Yeah.
So the decision was made to grab the Scorebox out of the old nursery ground.
The pull the strings box.
Pull the strings box and wheel it into position at long on if you're bowling from the nursery end. And put it there so that we could keep the score running. And we almost got there and got into position and ready to do it when the ICC match referee said, "You are not allowed to change the conditions of the ground from the start of the match." Didn't matter, there was no score available at any point in the ground, but we were not allowed to operate the manual scoreboard. It got wheeled back onto the nursery ground.
So what's so different between having electronics to having a couple of folk in a box?
Well, it was because it wasn't there at the start of the game, and therefore the match referee, it had changed what the batsman, and it was Sangakkara was batting at the time and batting very well. He was, I'm not sure whether he just passed or was very close to his century, but the match referee said that it changed the condition that he could see, and therefore we weren't allowed to have it. And the ground staff had gone to great lengths to try and get this Scorebox onto the ground because with the power down, the sight screen at the nursery end is power driven, and the one at the pavilion end you can see stewards pushing it backwards and forwards on runners, but at the nursery ground it's power driven, and it was frozen where they'd stopped the over before lunch, which was right in the middle of play because that's where they'd been bowling from that end. So to get the big Scorebox through the gap had been an absolute nightmare, and it had taken them a long time to get this Scorebox actually on the ground. And I happened to be in the Scorebox at the time the decision was made to take it off the ground, and I was merrily pulling the strings, trying to get the score round to match the one electronic scoreboard that was still going. And it was really surreal because this Scorebox had been placed on the grass outside the boundary, and I was in this box, and Stuart Broad was fielding just in front of me, and it was just like being back at my club where you can talk to the fielder from your score table or your Scorebox. It was and being down on that grass with all the crowd there was just an amazing feeling, and I had to sort of block all this out and go, no, concentrate, pull the strings, get the scoreboard up to date, because then I've got to keep scoring from as the runs are being scored. But the Scorebox moved. I felt the Scorebox lift, and it was only inches off the ground, But I jumped out of it because I felt the earth move.
This is amazing. This is one of the best stories you've told. Carry on.
This is how I remember it so vividly. Because I jumped out of the scorebox as it was moving because I didn't know what was going on at the time. And there was this huge roar from the crowd, and I assumed that Sangakkara had just scored another boundary or passed another milestone. But unfortunately, the power had returned at that point, and all three scoreboards were just temporarily, for a second or two, showing me jumping out of the scorebox. But yeah, the power was returned at that point, so we went back to the scorebox and carried on business as usual. But
absolutely, like nothing had happened.
Yeah, and then
interesting day.
After that, they decided that they couldn't go through anything like that again, and that's when they got the manual scoreboard.
Exactly right. Yeah, that's one of the reasons for the manual scoreboard being in place.
But the media centre was out as well. Everything round from the pavilion, round past the scorebox, so that's the mound stand, round past the scorebox, right round to include the media centre, all that had lost power.
Yes.
So the only bit that had power was the pavilion going round the other way. The pavilion past the Allen stand and the grandstand were all still fine. And I think that Sky were able to continue because they bring their own generator. But correct, the TMS team had decamped somewhere into the pavilion while we were dealing with the scorebox debacle. They decamped somewhere into the pavilion, I believe, to try and continue their commentary.
I think you're right, and I think peculiarly, the game never stopped.
No, it didn't.
It carried on. They never stopped the match at all. It carried on.
The reason why play managed to continue was that the power went down during the lunch, and they just carried on immediately after lunch with the game. Yeah, so we were supposed to magic the score from somewhere onto a board with no power.
It's why the ICC mandate about not changing the ground conditions is why quite often you'll see them faffing around with sight screens and tarpaulins, and you may often think, why have they not just put another tarpaulin sheet up for a sight screen? The answer is they're not allowed to.
There was all sorts of problems because they were trying to put it where it was suitable for the cricket and it wouldn't interfere with the play, but it was going to be in front of people who'd bought tickets, and that was one of the biggest issues, was that you can't place it there because people have paid to see cricket and they won't be able to see. So it was a nightmare as to where they were going to put this scorebox.
Absolutely, yeah, yes.
But it was a bizarre day.
Very much so.
Oh, it's amazing. What a brilliant story.
Yeah, that's the reason why they've got the board now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And also why it gets operated from the beginning, rather than you just having a couple of people watching who could go down and pull strings if something went wrong. To have it operated all the way through the game means that you're not changing the conditions. If that board is moving all the time through the game, then it is moving. So whether it's required or not, it can just carry on.
Oh, it's one of the best because it's lovely scoring there at Lords, because you get the view of the cricket, and then you get to sort of do like you would kind of what you were saying with the Stuart Broad thing, and the fact that you feel like you're scoring your village club match because you're doing the boards, but you also get people going up the stairs, so you're even bantering all the way through the World Cup. Actually, last year you hear all the ground noise, which sometimes you don't hear up in the box. It really is something else. I'm so glad they've got it. And if that's the reasons really why, it makes sense.
For those of you who have been fortunate enough to go to Wormsley, it has one of the most loveliest manual scoreboxes around. Bill Makepeace mentioned scoring an England women's match there in the interview last week. And today we have an interview with those two scorers, Sue Robinson and Vanessa Holliday.
So I'm talking now to two women who've scored quite a lot of women's cricket. I've got Sue Robinson. Hello, Sue.
Hello, Sue.
And Vanessa Holliday. Hello, Vanessa.
Hi, Sue.
So we'll start with you, Sue. Could you just tell us who you've been scoring for women's cricket?
Yeah, currently I score for Surrey Women. I do all of their games. I scored for Surrey Stars until the end of the tournament last year. previously I'd scored for my club Redoubtables, but with all the other stuff that I do now, I don't get to score for them anymore. And in fact, I think they may well have stopped playing now.
Okay.
And I've also been scoring England women's cricket, the T20s, ODIs and test matches. I started in 1998, I think. So although it only occasionally, but in the last few years, I've been fortunate enough to do a bit more.
Lovely. And Vanessa, how about you? Who do you score for?
Well, I'm sort of currently the Yorkshire scorer for the women, and I have done a bit of club, but I ran out of time, so I actually stopped doing that a few years back. So it's basically Yorkshire women's cricket and the international stuff.
Excellent.
I mean, like Sue, I've been doing fairly lengthy time, but I started my international career in 1986, and it was a complete fluke. I was supposed to be the gopher when the Indians came to Blackpool back in 1986, and I ended up on crutches, so I ended up scoring, and the person that was supposed to score ended up doing the running around, and it's just taken off from there.
So you've mentioned test matches and ODIs, so could you tell me a little bit about the format of cricket that is played by the England women?
Well, the England women play all of the same formats that the men do. They play test matches, one-day internationals and T20s. The test matches are run over 4 days, and it's 100 overs a day because the women play that much more quickly than the men. And I think that's why it's over 4 days rather than 5. But the T20s are obviously 20 overs, but I think the time limit for the women is less than for the men. And the ODIs, again, it's 50 overs, but they have to bowl them in 3.25 hours, I think, which is slightly less than the men.
And is there a point scheme that links all three together?
Yes, it's different points for the winning and the losing, obviously on the draws. You have, I think it's the same points for the ODIs and the T20, and then different pointing for the test match. It's usually only one test match per series that they do by points usually.
Right.
So winning or losing or drawing that is a huge advantage, really, especially for a win.
And that tends to apply just to the Australian series at the moment. The women only play Test cricket against India and against Australia, so the point system applies only to the Australian games because that's how they decide who wins the Ashes. Whereas with the Indians, there isn't a trophy per se, but so it's an Ashes specific thing, the point system.
Oh, I didn't realise that. That's very interesting. So is there a competition management for these sort of games? How do you know where the points go, or when you finish scoring the game, do you have to report back to anybody?
Because we do it on PCS Pro, and they also have an analyst on board as well. I think that the ECB management of the women's side automatically know that who won and the different thing, and they sort out the points system for it at the close of the game.
And now you mentioned, Vanessa, that you scored for the Indian team. So do they not bring a scorer of their own when they come?
Very occasionally in the past they have done. I think it was the Australians and the New Zealand that brought one. And I'm talking back in the late 80s, early 90s. But recently, no, we've had to provide the two scorers. And if possible, one of their team would come to score with us. But mainly it's just whoever is selected from here for the England game, for whichever game it is.
Right. And do they wear numbers on their shirts like the men do these days? Because otherwise I imagine player identification could be quite tricky.
For the one-dayers, yes. I don't think we've done a test match, have we, Sue, since that started? Well, I'm hoping that they do, because, yes, as you can imagine, once they've all put their helmets on and stuff like that, you haven't a clue who they are.
It's easier with the England players because we score a lot of domestic games. You get to recognise the way people walk, people's run up, and you tend to know where people field. So, for example, you would always know where Lydia Greenway was fielding. You tend to know that Nat Siver fields out at square leg, and Catherine Brunt's out on the cover boundary, and Danny White's out on the boundary. So you get a feel for it, but it's the overseas teams, especially teams like the Sri Lankans, who've got the most impossible names, that are are quite difficult to score. And if you're doing a manual score sheet at the same time as doing PCS Pro, which with international cricket tends to be a necessity because computers have this habit of crashing when you least expect it or least want them to, you trying to keep up with some of these names can be quite a challenge.
Indeed. So have either of you been abroad to do scoring like this?
No, I'd love to, though.
I went in 98. I went to South Africa with the England under-19s and an under-21 squad. They played in the South African regional tournament and played 3 ODIs against South Africa. And because I was along with a friend who was a selector, so I actually got to score for the young England girls then. And they had players like Charlotte Edwards and Laura Newton and Beth Morgan and Claire Taylor and all the youngsters who then went through to actually play for England and in the subsequent years. And it was actually quite fun.
Yeah.
But generally, scores are provided by the country where the matches are held.
I guess it saves on travel fees and hotel expenses. So what sort of grounds do the women play at? Do they play at the same as the men, or are they on different grounds?
I mean, for county, I think we end up playing anywhere we can possibly find a ground that's fairly suitable. But for the internationals, I think mainly we are now at the county grounds. Possibly not the same ones that the men's internationals are played at, but we do play at the first class grounds.
It's very mixed because some of these brand new pavilions have got some quite good facilities. There's a club near Reading who've got a fantastic clubhouse and who've got a room for scorers, which is wonderful. It's got lots of space. But then you go to Northampton County Ground and you try and fit. Well, you must know yourself. You must have scored there yourself.
I have. I know exactly what you mean.
Trying to squeeze the scoreboard operator and 2 scorers in. And there's no chance for the Opta scorer, who then has to go and sit in the press box. So if something goes wrong, you then end up having to leg it across to the press box to speak to the Opta scorer. So,
you two have talked about you scoring for the women's internationals. Are there more people who do that? Do you have a team of people that you can call on to do these matches, or is it just you two?
No, there's a group of us. What has happened in the past, and whether it will continue, I don't know, is there is a panel of scorers who have scored women's cricket, so that the advantage of that is not only do you have a better chance of knowing the players, but it's also a bit of a reward for people who actually score in the women's game. Because as in all parts of the cricket nowadays, trying to get officials of any type is becoming more and more difficult. And if you can offer them the possibility of doing internationals, it tends to encourage people to stay scoring women's cricket.
In the past, there's been county, or well, maybe you could tell me what sort of formats they were at county level.
Well, there's been 50 over one-day games, probably for the beginning of the season, and then it's moved on to T20 for the county, and then followed on to the Kia Super League at the end of sort of July, August time. And that's been the kind of type of the games that there have been so far.
But now this year, what was supposed to happen, they scrapped the 50 over county championship. They were still going to run the T20 championship this year and next year. And then the rest of the season was going to you were looking at the 100, the introduction of the 100, because there were going to be 8 women's teams to run alongside the men's teams. So the whole county programme was changing, and I think the whole of women's cricket now is being based around the 8 regional centres, so that instead of having every county doing everything, a lot of the cricket now is going to be based around the regional development centres.
So with the women's 100, were there international stars being brought across to play in those matches for the women like there were to be for the men?
Yes. Each of the 8 teams could have up to 3, I think, international players. Most of them had been announced. Now, whether they'll stay the same for next year, I don't know. So, for example, the Cardiff-based team, you had Meg Lanning, Alyssa Healy, another Australian player. So they were going to have 3 very strong overseas players. Surrey had picked up Rachel Haynes, Danae Van Niekerk, and I think we were going to get Marizanne Kapp as well. So each of the teams could have up to 3 overseas players.
I think the last Women's World Cup was held over here, am I right?
2017, yeah.
Yeah. So were either of you involved in the scoring of that?
I think we both did some. I did 4 games. I think you did some as well, didn't you, Ness?
I did 3 and watched the rainfall an awful lot of times.
Oh, no.
I was quite lucky because I did the South Africa versus England semi-final. The thing that I always remember is a test match that I think Nessie and I did at Shenley when it was swelteringly hot. I mean, it was back in the days of when we were doing PA Sport scoring, and I was doing the PA Sport computer, and we were at Shenley. It was England versus Australia, and Sarah Elliott was in the process of getting 230 odd runs not out, and it must have been up to 40 degrees, and the PA Sport computer just crashed. So poor Nessie, not only did she have to continue scoring the game, she then had to put up with me mithering in the background because I was then having to be on the phone to PA Sport updating the score every 5 minutes in the sweltering heat. And ironically, the following year we played India and we were due to have a test match at Shenley. And in fact, that game got cancelled because it was flooded, it was underwater. So instead of playing test matches, we had to go to Beaconsfield and have an ODI.
I always remember that T20 that you and I did at Cambridge, just after our county championships when it was the 5-day tournament. And I think it was New Zealand and England, and you were doing the PA score, but they'd asked you to pinpoint where the shots were.
Fortunately, they soon realised that it was impossible at the speed that the women play for the scorer to actually input where the shot went, as well as to record all the other information. So fairly soon after that, they realised that it just wasn't practical. You can do it for the men's game because it tends to be a lot more slow, but for the women's game, it just was a nightmare.
So when you're scoring in an England women's game, do you travel with the team and would you get to know them? Do you stay with them and talk to them?
We tend to stay in the same hotels now. There was a period when they wouldn't let us stay in the same hotels. You don't follow them around. Different people are allocated different games. But it's, I suppose, because the women's game is much smaller, we know a lot of the players. I mean, you get to know a lot of them because I've played against a lot of them and then have scored them. And Nessie the same. The thing that I usually say to people who, if they have to come and score with us, is that it is just another game of cricket. If you're used to the pace of women's cricket, it's not too bad. But if you don't generally do women's cricket and you're asked to do a women's game, you need to be prepared for the fact that they tend to play a lot more quickly. But it is basically just another game of cricket. And if you work with your colleagues, it makes life so much easier. Bear in mind as well that with televised games, you don't actually get to talk to the umpires. You talk to the TV umpire on a walkie-talkie, so that the teamwork is much more between the 2 scorers and the TV umpire than it is generally with the 2 umpires and the 2 scorers.
Well, thank you both very much. Thank you, Vanessa, and thank you, Sue, for very interesting information on the England women's team scoring.
It's time for drinks. And now we're back.
Thank you, Sue. Last week we posed the question, but asked the scorer about which penalty run offences do not count as a ball in the over. Do either of you want to tackle that one?
Well, I'll have a go at answering that one if you want. I'm initially going to say that it's not scoring knowledge, because it's up to the umpire to decide whether or not a ball counts as one in the over. So a scorer, according to Law 3, is just going to record what they see. However, it is really good information to know, because if you get an extra ball in the over, then you might wonder why you're getting another ball. If you've recorded something and all of a sudden you're getting another ball, it's really good to know that it may be because of some penalty runs. And I think that there are 4 times when a ball has been delivered, but by penalties being added to that delivery, it won't count as a ball in the over. And the one that most people will be familiar with is what they will call fake fielding, but the law calls a deliberate distraction, deception, or obstruction of either batsman. So that's when a fielder deliberately tries to deceive a batsman. Law 41. 41.5, I think that one is. So that doesn't count as a ball in the over, which is kind of odd, because if the batsmen have already run some runs, then they will get those runs in addition to the penalty runs, but still the ball won't count in the over. So you could have the batsman hitting the ball for 4, the 5 penalty runs added on. You could have 9 runs and no ball has been delivered. So that's quite a strange case. There's also a deliberate attempt to distract the striker when the striker is preparing to receive a delivery. So that one doesn't count either. Illegal fielding, which is Law 28, I think, and also a fielder returning without permission. So if a fielder's gone off for some reason, comfort break to change boots or something like that, they come back on without asking permission from the umpire, but then they have to come in contact with the ball. So if they just come on and don't touch the ball, then they'll get away with it. But if they come onto the field of play and touch the ball, then that could be penalty runs as well. And that's another case where you get the runs that the batsman might have run, but the ball still doesn't count in the over.
So we have a question that's come in on Ask the Scorer. Hooray! And it's a very exciting one as well. So we have a scorer trainer who's in the Durban area in South Africa, and he's trained many scorers. So it's lovely to hear not only from someone from the Southern Hemisphere writing in, but also a fellow trainer as well. And this is his question.
I have a question regarding the wides in a partnership. Now, we all know that wides do not count as one of the 6 legal deliveries in an over, just like a no ball would not count. However, when you're adding up the total deliveries faced by a batter, you will count no balls, but you will not count the wide deliveries. So my question is, when adding up the deliveries faced in a partnership, will you count wide deliveries bowled? Look forward to hearing your thoughts on that, and really loving this podcast series. It's awesome to hear the thoughts of other fellow scorers. Thanks for your time.
So that's an awesome question by Rory there from Durban, South Africa, and one we can have a think over for the next week before the next podcast.
Yeah, and if anybody out there has got some thoughts on that, then do let us know. Send in your thoughts to our Twitter account, which is @CricketScorers1. Or also you could send them, as Rory has done, send it into cricketscorersuntallied@gmail.com. So if you've got any thoughts on the answer to Rory's question, or if you've got any more questions that you'd like to include in Ask the Scorer in a future week, it would be really great to hear from.
Yeah, absolutely. It's always lovely to hear from scorers, and in fact we're having some reach at the moment. We're still yet to crack South America, but I'm keeping fingers crossed on that. But yeah, wherever you're listening to us around the world, do let us know, because it's lovely to connect, especially during this time with scorers globally.
Well, that's all for this episode of Cricket Scorers Untallied. It's been good to speak to you all as always. And it's goodbye from Sue. And it's goodbye from Jules.
It's been lovely speaking to you again this week. It's so lovely, not just, like I say, to connect up, but also hear about the fantastic stories that you've got of the Lord's Scorebox as well.
Thank you, and goodbye.